Scanning for audio.
Welcome once again to the Tin Dog Podcast, and I'd just like to thank everyone for taking their time out to send me emails about the great time they were having at Gallifrey. I am indeed just a little bit jealous. The next 4 Tin Dog Podcasts are all being recorded back to back today, in order to allow real life not to interfere too much with our enjoyment of Doctor Who. So if something enormous happens in the news world, and I just fail to talk about it, you can just forgive me on that one, can't you? And so every week or every 10 days, you'll still get your Tin Dog Podcast, but they're all being recorded today. First up is The Romans and the Key to Time, Part 2.
Here we are, safety down.
What's that movement, Doctor? Well, surely you can feel it.
Doctor, what's happening?
No,
Take off again, Doctor.
hold on.
As I covered the rescue last time, of course it's time for me to cover The Romans. They were made in the same production block, with the same crew, as well as the same cast. But this story is very, very different from the rescue. Our heroes last time were left dangling over a precipice, and the TARDIS plummeted to Earth. That was the cliffhanger, literally a cliffhanger. And at the beginning of this story, we see Ian apparently unconscious, and then the camera pulls out, and we discover he's dressed in a toga, reclining and enjoying himself, apparently in some sort of Roman villa. Of course everyone was fine. The TARDIS is now covered in vines. Time has passed, and the TARDIS crew seem to be enjoying themselves. Admittedly, some of them are getting slightly bored, but that's only to be expected. The narrative of this piece is that of a pseudo-historical. In fact, if anything, it's a classic Doctor Who story. The narrative splits off into 2. The Doctor and Vicki decide to make their way to Rome, just for a quick look, and get embroiled in all sorts of antics, more about that in a moment, while Ian and Barbara also are split up in that classic Doctor Who fashion, and experience the whole story, but from a completely different side. But The Romans itself is actually one of those very, very small numbers of Doctor Who stories that appear to have been written for laughs, or appear to be written slightly tongue-in-cheek. Whether it has been written for laughs is debatable, although it does get a few laughs, and in that it is more of an exception to prove a rule. You see, other comedy episodes of Doctor Who are things like The Creature from the Pit, but The Creature from the Pit is more laughed at by fans than it is a comedy episode. Nobody set out deliberately to make Creature from the Pit into a comedy. This was a very specific thing, but it's not purely a comedy. I'm not explaining myself completely well. You see, with the split narrative, the Ian and Barbara plot, we have a fairly comedy-free storyline. We are seeing the Roman Empire from the underneath, from the lower class end of things. I mean, let's face it, episode 1 is called The Slave Traders, so you can kind of guess where that's going. The comedy aspects are almost completely that of the first Doctor and Vicky's experiences through Rome and all the way to meeting the farcical Nero. Yes, other stories in Doctor Who are played for laughs. The Unicorn and the Wasp, a good example of that sort of thing, but it's still at its core a Doctor Who tale. It has some comedy moments, but it's still a story that is very identifiably Doctor Who. Looking more at Classic Who, of course, as well as that Creature from the Pit named earlier, we have the Happiness Patrol. Never again has the fear of saying the word Candyman 3 times in the mirror truly gripped anyone as much during that show, as well as the Killer Poodle and the Pink TARDIS. Happiness Patrol's redeeming feature is that it's only 3 episodes long. Of course, this doesn't exactly have the most historically accurate moments. They're not sitting round lying down to eat, they're sitting on chairs to eat. The weapons are wrong, some of the design is wrong. But this is Doctor Who. We can let it go. We can forgive it. The performances are all equally strong. Just as with the rescue. Hardly fluffs his lines at all. And when he does, it's still part of the character. It's very important that we experience this story. The Romans itself is not as bad a story as most people make out. Maybe it's in these like days where we all think that Doctor Who stories require an alien influence. Well, it won't keep everyone happy all of the time. But as historical stories go, this one isn't bad at all. It's only 4 parts, rather than the 6-part that I was expecting. And the farce aspects that people seem to go on about when they're reviewing this sort of thing are really only limited to episode 3. And episode 3 is a curious piece in any 4-part story. Many people just refer to episode 3 as the padding, or the runaround, to such an extent that Big Finish have almost completely dropped episode 3 from the 4-part stories, producing a much faster-paced 3-part structure. The beginning, middle and end, rather than the beginning, the middle, the bit, and then the end, if you can see what I mean. Deep down into the good story. It's not the worst. It's something you can enjoy with your friends. I'd rather not sit down and compare it with Fires of Pompeii, despite the fact that it is an inject in the Fires of Pompeii. I'm going to have to find out the real story of who set fire to Rome. Nero may have been younger, thinner, and slightly less insane in real life than the Nero portrayed here. But this is television fantasy, and we let it off. And so the DVD itself. Well, for comedy fans out there, Toyhiro, the comedy star, responsible for the Doctor audio and stage play, and hopefully one day video, Doctor Who. Mossed my Doctor Who scarf managed to bring together the DVD commentary particularly well. If you want to know more about his thoughts on doing the commentary, I suggest you nip over to the Radio Free Scaro interview with him, recorded at this year's Gallifrey, and learn some more there. But the commentary itself is very, very well put together. It strikes that balance between overly saying how great everyone was and genuinely interesting stories. It's nicely put together and presents us with a nice, if slightly rose-tinted view of everyone's time working on the Romans. Other things in this DVD are very good, but 2 of which stick out in my mind. The first of which is one of those DVD extra gems that make you want to buy the box set just for that. The short doco, as Trevor likes to call them, on Dennis Spooner, the writer, is particularly well done. We've all seen his name up time and time again at the end of Doctor Who stories, and a variety of other 60s cult programmes, but the man's prolific output, and the fact that he was almost universally liked by everyone, was not to be underestimated. Randall Hopkirk deceased, The New Avengers, Department S, Jason King, Thunderbirds. This guy could turn his hand to almost anything, keeping his tongue firmly in his cheek sometimes, but always managing to write extremely believable dialogue for an extremely unbelievable world. When Dennis Spooner died, there wasn't even an obituary printed in the Times. And after seeing this documentary, and seeing how much he's missed, I for one will be keeping a bigger eye out for his work in future, and raising a glass to him from time to time. Another extra on the disc deals with the girls of Doctor Who in the 60s, and the historical perspective in the show. It's not just screaming girls in miniskirts, although of course that does take up quite a large section of the documentary. Other things on this disc are a little bit more Romans specific. What Did the Romans Ever Do for Us? Takes its name from the popular BBC Two series What Did the Romans Do for Us, which again takes its name from the Monty Python, and you know all this already, so I don't need to talk about it. It deals with interviews of all of the surviving Neros from other shows. Christopher Biggins, heard in the Doctor Who Big Finish story The One Doctor, which I'm sure many of you have nipped out and bought, or at least acquired in some form or another, after hearing about the basic plot of the next Doctor. He played Nero in the BBC adaptation of I, Claudius back in the 70s. Other Neros are all interviewed, and they all give their own take on what it's like to play Roman parts. An excerpt from BBC's Blue Peter talks about how Romans ate, And despite the fact that it's got Peter Purvis in it, you sort of sit there going, and what does this actually mean to me? I'll leave it there. There is a particularly nice Easter egg, where you get to see the model used by the director to work out where all the cameras go. It's the original one from the 60s, and it's a glorious piece of artwork, and reminded me of the Carol Ann Ford story where she talks about the model used in the filming of The Reign of Terror, which she managed to keep because it was a perfect doll's house. And it wasn't until years later when her cleaner knocked it off the top of her wardrobe that it was finally destroyed. I'm not sure that counts as a ramble or not. Either way, the Roman is well worth investing in. And with that small review, I'll move on and speak to you all very, very soon. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, I'll be speaking to you in about 2 minutes' time, in the next Tin Dog podcast. Be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.